Warning, some of the images shown during this presentation are graphic and may be disturbing to some people.
Okay, so it's great to be in the Word of God today. Especially turning the Bible to you. John chapter 3. What we're going to find here is a manual.
If faced with this situation, would you know what to do? The I Lived course is designed to educate the public on how you can mitigate the loss of life if you find yourself in an active violence event. The goals of I Lived training are for you to recognize the need for immediate response to these types of incidents, identify ways you may intervene, and empower you to make a difference. Your ability to adopt a strong survival mindset, practice good situational awareness, recognize active violence when it occurs, and implement proactive response strategies can make a vitally important impact throughout your community. Indeed, you too can become an immediate responder. Let's watch and learn how to save a life.
God, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for the work that you're doing through IC Saved and AZCSN. Father, I thank you for everybody here. I thank you for their heart to help one another, to help their fellow Arizonans, their fellow Americans, Father, to help them educate, to train their mind, Father, to do good, to save lives and to stop evil, because these folks here have faced reality and know there is such a thing as evil. And sometimes it shows up at the worst times. Thank you, Lord, for this group of sheepdogs. I pray for this event this morning. I pray that it'll go well, that we'll be able to provide our best for the cameras so that ultimately the folks that will be watching this will be able to learn well. Help us, Father, to provide few distractions so that you can get your message across. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for being here and for taking the time to learn about this important subject. I'm Sam, representing IC Save today, and this is Chris.
And I'm representing Arizona Church Security Network.
We want to share with you the I Lived program, and we'll explain why we named it this in a little bit. I want to start with a couple quotes that'll pique your interest. See if you can guess where this quote comes from. It does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near one. That's a quote from The Hobbit, written by J.R.R. Tolkien. Let me give you this second quote too, maybe it'll make more sense. Denial and inactivity prepare people well for the roles of victim and corpse. Let me say that one more time. Denial and inactivity prepare people well for the roles of victim and corpse. Don't want to start too much fear, but we want to recognize something. Reality isn't always the way we think it is. We spend a lot of time enjoying life, trying to bring joy to life and to others. And sometimes we forget that there's evil in the world. We forget that there's danger in the world. And we forget how it can show up in our churches, in our schools, in our communities, and we're woefully unprepared for it. And as we've been seeing in the news over the past many years, evil shows up in schools, in churches, in public squares, in multiple different ways, and it takes lives. And we found that many of these cases could be mitigated through some public education, which is what developed this I Lived program, which is what's birthed groups like Arizona Church Security Network, IC Save. These are a group of individuals who want to help the community. If they only knew what we knew, they could have done this different, or they could have done this and could have saved lives. And so that's the effort of this work, is to try to give you that information so that you can make different choices, so that you can do good, that you can save lives. We're going to get into a lot of great things today. You'll be able to take this information and really use it in the rest of your life. But we don't want to start with fear, because fear is paralyzing. Chris is going to explain that a little bit more.
So what our goal is for this program is to make each one of you an immediate responder. As we looked at those first quotes that Sam just shared with you, if I was a hobbit, it would be prudent for me in my plan for my family, for my business, to have a chapter that is devoted to dragons, because dragons would be a real threat to me if I was a hobbit. Now, obviously, dragons are not a threat to us in our world today, but we know there are lots of different threats. So what we want to do is prepare you as immediate responders to be able to avoid some of our natural reactions that can lead to harm for us. So there are 3 things that we're going to talk about to begin the day. And the first is the most crucial, and that is developing a survival mindset. We want each and every one of you to develop your survival mindset so that you know in advance what you are going to do. The second part is you need to develop a plan. You need to have a plan for your house of worship, for your business, for your school, for your family. What are we going to do if something occurs when we're in worship together, when we're at the grocery store as a family? What can we do? But having a plan isn't just good enough. We need to practice our plan. So step 3 says we're going to go out, we're going to take our plan, and we're going to rehearse it. We're going to practice it. We're going to see what that looks like in the real world. And so Sam is going to share with you a little bit more about survival mindset.
So there have been many studies done to try to understand how we can train better and what kind of gear will help us win the day or save more lives or beat the enemy. And there have been studies, and what they cumulatively provide us is the data shows us that basically 90% of successful performance is based on psychological skills, not the gear and the equipment that we use. It plays a role, but the gear and the equipment that you use to save lives, to protect one another. If you're law enforcement, you're out there to protect and serve. If you're in the medical field, you're going to save lives through the instruments that you use. But you are the person making those decisions. Those are simply the tools at your disposal to carry those decisions out. This is important because what tells us is that we have to retrain our minds first, and then the gear makes sense. And this is what has birthed this program, because we realized that culture has been retraining itself to become very docile and to have a different version of reality than how it actually is. We've learned through movies and TV that you can just take a gun and shoot the bad guy and he's going to fly back 30 feet and that'll be it. And the reality is that's not reality. What it's also taught us is that when the bad guy comes in, when evil shows up at your door, the best thing to do is to cower in fear, is to find a place to hide, is to negotiate with them or just simply listen to their demands, is to let them be in control. And the problem is that will get people killed. And the good news is that there's something you can do about it. You have to start by retraining your mind so that you are in charge of the situation, that you can take care of the people around you. And that's what this program is going to do, is to help retrain your mind, your psychological skill set, so that everything around you becomes a tool for you to make good decisions and to employ those tools to have a successful event.
And so we want to give you an example, because as we look at survival mindset, a lot of times people will come up to us on breaks and say, I don't think I can do it. I think this is super complex. What do you mean? And they overthink what a survival mindset is. So I'm going to share with you about a little boy. We're going to talk about Jesse Lewis. And Jesse Lewis employed his survival mindset at 5 years old to save the lives of 6 of his peers. And so as we look at Jesse's story, we're going to look at a lot of accounts today of different real-world active attacker events. When we look at these events, there are some general guidelines that we want you to know that we're always going to follow. First of all, you're never going to hear us say the name of the attacker. So much of what these attackers want is the notoriety, the media, they want the largest body count so that they can be the most famous attacker. And that is not what we are here to do today. So we will never mention the name of the actual attacker. Also, as we look at what people do in these events, I don't want you to perceive that we're saying, look, these people were smart, these people were foolish, don't be foolish. That's not at all what we're doing. In fact, many times when we look at the people that had a more passive response, what they're doing is following what people like myself taught them to do for many years. Because our techniques, our programs have changed over the last 3 decades. And so what was once conventional wisdom may not be the case anymore. But unfortunately, we aren't able to train everybody. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do here, is get you the newest information. And so that's our disclaimer as we talk about these events. Never think that we're pointing fingers at people that are not effective or were unsuccessful in surviving the event. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about the Sandy Hook incident. Jesse Lewis, as I said, was a first grader. We know the way this event unfolded is that the attacker came to the school. The school had done everything physical security safeguard-wise that we recommended at the time. It had a single point of entry. You had to be buzzed in through an A-phone system in order to get into the office. And an A-phone is a lot like our Ring doorbells today. You could push the button, you could talk to the person, and then they would be able to buzz you into the office by unlocking the door electronically if they were going to allow you in. Well, our attacker that day knew he wasn't going to get buzzed into the office if he pushed the button on the A-phone. So what he did is took his weapon and shot through the glass panel that was right next to the door into the office. He was able then to walk right through the door and enter the office. Now, immediately, he was found with 2 individuals that had left a conference room nearby, the school principal and a school counselor. Unfortunately, they became his first victims as the gunman shot and killed both the principal and the counselor. There was no lockdown called at this time, and this goes back to knowing your plan, because in Sandy Hook, the only person who was allowed to call for a lockdown was the school administrator, the school principal, who was the first one who was shot and killed, unfortunately. So when we look at our planning, we need to make sure we have some redundancy there. The attacker leaves through the lobby of the school and goes out to the first grade wing, the first 2 classrooms, rooms 8 and 10. Investigators believe that he went to Miss Soto's classroom first. He opens the door to Miss Soto's classroom. Miss Soto had some prior knowledge. She had had an opportunity to hear those initial shots fired. She heard the shots that were fired through the glass. She heard the shots that were fired striking the principal and the counselor. So she had a little bit of time. So even if she had frozen, and we don't know that she did, she would have had time to work through that freeze, because it took time for that gunman to get to that classroom. What we do know is when he entered that classroom, Miss Soto had already taken 5 of her first grade students and hid them in a bathroom/storage closet that was within the classroom. When the gunman entered, it is believed he shot and killed Miss Soto immediately upon entry. At this point, we don't know what exactly happened. What we do know is there was a brief lull in gunfire. So we don't know, did the attacker need to reload his weapon system, or did the attacker have a malfunction that he had to clear? But during this lull in the gunfire, little Jesse Lewis found himself standing face to face with the gunman. Jesse, using his survival mindset, uttered one word. He yelled at his classmates to run. 6 of his classmates ran past the gunman and out of the school. They were the only 6 that exited the school on their own. Unfortunately, we know the gunman was able to bring his weapon system back into the attack, and Jesse Lewis is believed to be the next person that he shot and killed. He then went around the room shooting at the other students, many of who had been scattered across the classroom. So why did they not run on their own? Well, if we think about the way we're designed, we know we're going to do one of three things. We're going to freeze, we're going to flee, or we're going to fight. And absent training, we're most likely going to freeze. And so when you look at these 5 and 6-year-old children and a gunman comes in and shoots their teacher in front of them, the natural reaction for the majority of those kids is going to be to freeze. That would be normal. And so by Jesse yelling, "Run," he was able to get 6 of his peers to realize what they needed to do and to exit that classroom. Now, we believe the gunman next walked across the hall to a classroom where Miss Rousseau was, another first grade classroom. Miss Rousseau was a substitute teacher. She had taught at the school a lot, but she wasn't the children's regular assigned classroom teacher. When the gunman entered that room, it is believed that Miss Rousseau had tried to get children to spread out, but what investigators found was that all the children had gone to one corner of the classroom. And so unfortunately in this classroom, when the attacker entered, he shot and killed Miss Rousseau and then proceeded to shoot all of the children as they were huddled in the corner of the classroom. In Miss Rousseau's class, all of the children, with the exception of one little girl, died as a result of that incident. So when we look here, we can see something that is absolutely crucial and something you're going to hear us talk a lot about in the I Lived program, and that is an active response versus a passive response. Now, again, we're not looking at Miss Rousseau and saying, well, she should have been more active, because the children in Miss Rousseau's room did exactly what we taught for a long time in our schools. Back in the 1980s, there was a problem in Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles Unified School District and the Los Angeles Police Department came together, and they thought, we need to find a solution for this problem. The problem was drive-by shootings. So what they did is they said, when we go on a lockdown because of a drive-by shooting, we're going to have all of the kids go to the corner of the room furthest from any doors or windows. We want them away for the openings. And so they would all go huddle in a corner furthest from the doors and windows. Would that work well for a drive-by shooting? Overall, it does, because the bullets are more likely to come through the windows or doors than the walls, although we know they can penetrate walls. So that worked for an exterior attacker. The problem is that same strategy doesn't work when the attacker is inside the room with you, inside the building with you. But many, many times, even in our schools today, that's still the protocol that we follow. When they go on lockdown, they will have all of the children huddle in one corner. And that's really part of our mission with I Lived, is to get this newer training out. We need an active response. We know passive responses don't work. We also know with active responses, we're going to mitigate loss of life. We're going to see less loss of life. I don't want you to think that as a result of I Lived today, that you'll be able to survive a situation no matter what. We can't make that kind of guarantee. But what we can do is say, based on the real world evidence of incidents, that if you take action, some sort of action, you are going to mitigate loss of life in that event. And that's everything that we want you to see today, is this idea of immediate responders mitigate loss of life through taking action.
So, Chris just kind of touched on it. You're survivors. And if you're going to survive well, you have to become something that's called a problem solver. Sounds kind of silly to say it like that, but that's what it comes down to. Little Jesse was faced with a problem, and he decided to do something active. He said, run. And all of the kids around him, or at least 6, heeded that warning, and they did something. They ran out of the room. Could something terrible have happened? Maybe he'd have gotten, the perpetrator maybe got his weapon in battery again and could have engaged some of the kids? Maybe. Did those children have a chance because they were active? They were running. They're now moving targets instead of static ones? Absolutely. You becoming a problem solver gives you control over the situation, which is what we're going to teach you here today. You need to take charge of the situation and take that control back from the perpetrator, and you can do it. We're going to show you how. When you are faced with the problem, you need solutions to that problem. Sometimes your solutions work, sometimes your solutions don't. But by you employing a solution and giving it a shot, you have a chance that you didn't have before. You gave yourself and the loved ones around you a chance that they didn't have 10 seconds ago. Jesse Lewis gave his fellow schoolmates a chance, and 6 of them are going to be around to talk about it later. We're going to talk about situational awareness, paying sufficient attention to one's surroundings so that you can identify the threats and the dangerous situations that are forming around you. You have to have your mind engaged in the situation. Now, this takes some training. And one of the first things that usually comes to people's minds when they think of being situationally aware, oh man, I got to be paranoid for the rest of my life. I got to be looking over my shoulder all the time. That's not it at all. And you'll find one of the concerns is people think that's exhausting. And if that's what you did all your life, it would be. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about you simply being aware of your surroundings. You don't have to be in fear of them. In fact, once you're aware of your surroundings and you have a tool set to deal with problems, you're a problem solver, those potential scary situations that you don't know about no longer bother you because you have a tool set and a mindset and a skill set and a survival mentality to deal with any problem. And so you're in charge. You'll find that by being situationally aware, you will be taking fear away and out of your own heart because you're now empowered to deal with these problems on your own.
So we're now going to talk about a couple of different types of incidents. Most people are concerned about active attacker, active shooter incidents because those are the incidents that make the headline news, that we see make the worldwide news. The reality is that mass casualty incidents are not as common as you would think based on mainstream media. So when we look here, we're going to look at 2 different types of events. And the wonderful part about I Lived is it prepares you for both of these types of events. The first one we're going to look at is Sutherland Springs, Texas. And as you may recall, Sutherland Springs, Texas, we had a mass casualty incident where a gunman came in, ended up being so far the deadliest active shooter situation at a house of worship in the United States. And we're going to contrast that to an incident that happened at First United Presbyterian Church of Coudersport, Pennsylvania. Now, when we look at this case in Pennsylvania, a lot of you probably haven't heard about this incident. But this is an incident that is much more likely to occur whether we're looking at a school context, a church context, or other business context. So when we look here, this was an incident of domestic violence. On a Sunday morning, during the worship service that day, we had a lady playing the organ in front of the entire congregation. She was the music minister for the church. She had been estranged from her husband for a couple of years, but they had been married for a long time prior to that, and they had both been very active in this church. That particular Sunday morning, the ex-husband entered the church. He carried a handgun openly in his hand from the back of the church all the way, walking up on the platform to where his ex-wife is playing the organ in front of the entire church. He then proceeds to shoot her multiple times. He walks out of the building, goes out to his vehicle, and he sets the gun down on his vehicle. Throughout this encounter, he was not intercepted by anybody in the congregation. Why do you think that might be? Right, they froze. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. But what is amazing is when he gets to his car and he sets the gun down, he decides, maybe I didn't shoot her enough to kill her. So he picks his gun up, he walks all the way back through the church, goes up to the orchestra, up to where the organ is, and continues to shoot her. Now, the second time, because there had been some time pass, some people had gotten out of their freeze. They were able to break that freeze, and they tried to stop him as he went up the second time on the platform. Unfortunately, he was still able to make it up on the platform and shoot her additionally 2 to 3 times, and she did die as a result of this horrific incident. The reason that we share this with you is that although most of the time we're focused on the mass casualty events, we are much more likely to witness a domestic violence incident or an interpersonal conflict incident. Those are going to be much more likely. And we're going to share some statistics about those types of incidents with you during our presentation today. So you've heard us both use this word active attacker. And once in a while, you'll hear us use the word active shooter. Why do we use active attacker now? The reason we use active attacker is that not all attacks are with firearms. There are lots of other ways that attacks can be carried out. When we look at these other ways, we could have improvised explosive devices. We could have vehicle attacks. We can have attacks with edged weapons, knives, swords. And so we're going to look at some statistics relating to these different types of attacks, because what we have found is most people are very much mindful of firearms, but they're not as mindful of these other types of potential attacks. Now, Carl Chin with the Faith-Based Security Network has done a lot of statistical research. Since 1999, he has been tracking violent deadly force incidents at churches and other faith-based groups in the United States. And so we're going to share some of his data with you today because we want you to have a little bit of a feel for what does this look like in our country. So the study period that we're going to be looking at is from 1999 through December of 2017. And in that time, we know there were 1,706 deadly force incidents in the United States at houses of worship or faith-based organizations. When we look at those 1,706, the majority, or 997 of them, were active shooter situations. So we know firearms are certainly used by active attackers, but we also know it's not exclusively a firearm problem. When we look at other ways that attackers will work, we can look at knives. Knives and other stabbing weapons were used 266 times at faith-based organizations since 1999 in those deadly force attacks. We can look again to Franklin Regional High School in Pennsylvania as an example of a knife attack at a school. There, they had a 15-year-old student, went up, pulled the fire alarm pull station. He had brought a knife to school that day, had no specialized knife training, no martial arts background, nothing like that. When he pulled the pull box, what do all the students do? They come pouring out into the hallway. He was able to stab 24 students, 5 of them critically, in under 5 minutes as he walked through that hallway stabbing people as they moved past him to evacuate. So we have to be aware that edged weapons, knives, are a real threat, and we see knife attacks in this country. In addition, we need to talk about explosive devices. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is when we look at explosive devices, they're being used a lot. When we look at Columbine, Columbine was not originally going to be an active shooter event. The firearms were their backup plan. It was initially going to be a bombing. They had timed the cafeteria to figure out when the most students would be there. They had built bombs with propane tanks and many other types of devices, and they were proficient in their bomb making. That when we look at their basement tapes, when we look at some of their other journals, we can see that they had tested bombs. We know they worked. Fortunately, the bombs that day at Columbine did not all go off, especially the large ones in the cafeteria. We know they even, to distract local law enforcement and first responders, had put a bomb at a park, hoping that when that went off first, everyone would go to that bombing and they would have more time to kill more people at Columbine. So we know explosives are a real threat for us. To this day, the deadliest school incident still is as a result of explosives. We had our Bathhouse School massacre where we lost 38 elementary students and 6 teachers with 58 injuries back in the early part of the 1900s.
So let's take just a moment and pause. And these are horrific events. You think about Columbine, you think about the Bath Schoolhouse massacre. What we talked about earlier, using situational awareness, it's very often that you'll see, or very often that you'll be the one on your phone walking across the street, maybe walking across in public areas. It pays and saves lives for you to just put that away and have your head up and attention out. How many times do you think maybe these students might have seen something that just didn't make sense? Why are those 2 individuals bringing propane tanks into the cafeteria? What's that stuff on the propane tank? It doesn't look the same as a normal propane tank. Things like this might pique your interest if you're situationally aware. You'll see things in that park that didn't make sense. There's never been a propane tank or a box or contraption that just doesn't make sense. You've never seen it before. It doesn't look the same. It's out of place. I've never seen that in the park before. And this is why the government has put out so much material to try to help us see something and say something. Pay attention to your surroundings. I wonder if there was maybe a mother or a child, mother watching their child play in the park that day. Maybe they would have seen that box that looked out of place or that propane tank that was kind of funky. They could have made a phone call and said, hey, I don't know what this is, but somebody might want to go take a look at that. And we're seeing events where that is starting to happen more and more, and it's saving lives. So it pays for us to just pay attention to our surroundings. When we're out in the public, we should have our heads up, paying attention to what's going on. Not that we're in fear of it, but that we can see it, that we can pay attention and then report if there's an issue. Share it with our friends.
The last type of active attack that we want you to be aware of is vehicle attacks. And so we know that we have seen many vehicle attacks overseas. We've also had several in this country. It's not always going to be that mass casualty vehicle attack. When we look at vehicle attacks at faith-based organizations, out of those 1,706 deadly force incidents, 106 of those involved vehicle attacks. So what could a vehicle attack look like at a church? Well, what a lot of people don't realize is there were 2 other significant attacks on the day that the Sutherland Springs attack in Texas occurred. One of those was in Northern California. And there we had a lady who had taken her boyfriend to church, and her estranged husband was outside of the church. When they went to exit the church, the estranged husband tried to shoot them and was successful. But then, to make certain he was successful, he drove his vehicle and tried to run them over. And so, although things like the New York Times Square vehicle attack, again, as a mass casualty, makes the news, we need to be aware vehicles can be used as weapons, even in our school, church, and mall parking lots. So we're going to share with you now just a little bit about active shooters from the FBI studies. The FBI defines an active shooter as an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. And there have been a number of studies that they have done. The first was a long-term study from 1999 to 2013. They then did a 2014-15, a 16-17, and an 18 and a 19 study. And when we look at these studies, there are some important things that they reveal to us that we need to understand. First of all, we're going to look at the first study, which took place over a 14-year period. It was from, and I just said 1999, I should have said 2000. So this study was from 2000 to 2013. That 14-year period, they identified 160 incidents that met their definition that the FBI had. There are lots of different definitions out there for active attackers and active shooters. So this is limited to the definition I just shared with you. Out of those 160 incidents, 158 of those were single gunmen. 69% of those ended in 5 minutes or less. Who is not necessarily going to be at that location in 5 minutes or less? Law enforcement. And it's not that they don't want to be there. It's just they may have other calls. They may be involved in other situations. They may be understaffed. There's lots of different things that can occur. But this shows us just how crucial it is for us to become immediate responders. Because we know this situation, 69% of the time in this study, was over in 5 minutes. 23 of those incidents ended in 2 minutes or less. When we look at 2 minutes or less, what we know is a lot of times 911 will not have been called prior to the conclusion of the incident, because it takes more than 2 minutes for people to realize what's going on and get that phone call made. We're going to talk briefly about how do these incidents resolve. And when we look at this study, we know that the majority of the incidents, 56%, ended at the shooter's initiative. A lot of times we think when something ends at the shooter's initiative, we're talking about suicide. And that certainly can be the case, and we certainly see that in these active shooter situations. But it can also be like the Parkland High School shooting, where the gunman just simply left his stuff, blended in with everyone else as they were leaving campus, and ended up walking away from the event. But we know about 56% of the time they end at the shooter's initiative. However, this is a really important part for you to hear, and that is 21 of the incidents, or 13% of them, ended when unarmed citizens successfully were able to restrain the shooter and continue to keep them from killing, stop the killing until law enforcement arrived. And we saw that right here in Tucson, Arizona at the Gabrielle Giffords assassination attempt. There, when the gunman went to reload his weapon, ordinary citizens who were unarmed swarmed that attacker, brought him to the ground, and held him down until the sheriff's department was able to arrive. So we're going to now look at 3 different myths. The first of those I'm going to let Sam share with you about.
Yeah, this one's interesting. Most gunshot wounds are fatal. That's what we've taught ourselves to believe. We see it on TV or in video games, in movies, where, as I mentioned earlier, one shot and you shoot the bad guy and he goes flying back 3 feet, 30 feet, and he falls to the ground and the hero wins the day. The reality is that's not how it works. Many people who've been shot don't even know they're shot because their adrenaline is going and it dulls the senses. Many times, thankfully, because of modern medical technology, we're actually able to save the vast majority of people who are hit by handgun rounds and many rifle rounds on top of that. So myth number 1, most gunshot wounds are fatal. That's just not true. That means you need to tell yourself that. If I'm hit in a terrible situation, it doesn't mean anything. This fight's not over until you're not breathing anymore. And then it's no longer your problem. But while you're still breathing, this is a problem for you to solve. And it's best solved when you work together. Myth number 2, it won't happen here. We're starting to see even in the news, you probably heard from the statistics, there's a lot more happening that you've never heard about. But even at that, we're seeing more of it in the news. And on top of that, it's happening even more than they're able to report. The reality is it can happen literally anywhere at any time. It doesn't matter if it's a rural area. It doesn't matter if it's a very populated area. It could be out in the country. It doesn't matter if your organization is a large organization with many people, a small organization. It happens literally everywhere all the time, and there does not seem to be a pattern to it, unfortunately, because we can't predict where it's going to happen next. But we can still prepare for it because it could happen anywhere. The tools don't change. The principles that we're teaching you won't change. You're able to handle the situation wherever you're at. Myth number 2, it will not happen here. It very well could.
And as we look here, I want to share with you an account because I was blessed to be able to meet Pastor Frank Pomeroy at a church security network conference about 3 years ago. And Pastor Frank shared a lot with us that day, but one of the things that he shared directly relates to this myth number 2. Pastor Frank shared that, as you have heard in the media, he was not at his church that Sunday morning of this horrific attack.
This is the Sutherland Springs Church.
Yes. So as Pastor Frank was away, he was away learning how to use black powder to teach his children in the church some object lessons. Because what's going to get the youth to come to church in high school more than let's do some things with black powder and firearms? And he had written lessons to correspond to those from the Bible. As we look here, that Saturday night before this horrific event, he had gone to dinner with several other instructor candidates in this class. And at that dinner that night, one of the other candidates looked at Pastor Frank and asked him, "Do you ever worry about an active shooter coming to your church?" What do you think Pastor Frank would have said? No, that would never happen at Sutherland Springs. And what he didn't know is that less than 24 hours later, Sutherland Springs Church was going to become the scene of the deadliest active shooter attack at a house of worship in the United States. That he would lose 26 of his congregants, including his own 14-year-old daughter. And so one of the things that he left with us at that conference was how crucial it is to dispel this second myth. Because although it is not likely to happen, and we again want you to recognize that, it's not likely to happen at your business, your house of worship, your school. The problem is we don't know where it's going to happen next. So we have to be prepared.
Myth number 3, it takes a long time to hurt a lot of people. We've pretty much already dispelled this one, just from the stories that you've heard this morning. That young man was able to stab over 20 of his fellow students in under 5 minutes, just by getting them to rush out and run around in panic and chaos. That young man was in charge of the situation, not the people around him. Most of these active killer situations, particularly ones with firearms, are over in 5 minutes or less. It doesn't take a long time to hurt many people at all. That's myth number 3. We're going to talk about the stopwatch of death.
So we're going to look at a study now called the stopwatch of death, and this is a study done by Ron Borsch, who is a retired local and federal law enforcement officer. And what he did is he took all of the active shooter events that we have defined start and stop times for. So what do I mean by defined times? We know sometimes an active attacker will hurt family members or other people at a first location and then go commit their active attack at a second location. In those instances where we don't have a defined start and end time, he excluded those from his research. But as we look at the stopwatch of death, and he averaged out all of the shots that were fired and all of the times for these incidents, he came up with 3 statistics that are significant for us to understand. First of all, he discovered that on average, there was 1 shot fired every 4 to 15 seconds. Now, I want us to think a minute, because 1 shot every 4 to 15 seconds is incredibly slow. What that does not mean is that the active attacker came into where there were victims and shot, counted to 4, counted to 15, counted to 10 before they shot again. Okay, what we do know is when they have targets, they're going to shoot quickly. The reason that this is a 4 to 15 seconds is it's an average. He took the entire time from when the attacker arrived at the property until the attack ended, and he divided that by the number of shots. So I don't want you to think that they're slow in their shooting. It's when we look at these averages mathematically. But he said on average, one shot every 4 to 15 seconds. Then we have 50 to 70% of those strikes hit someone is what he found. Now 50 to 70% is a highly accurate hit rate. A lot of times we'll look at law enforcement shootings, and law enforcement shootings may not be at a 50 to 70% hit rate. So let's talk about why that could be. What would be the difference? And a lot of the difference is that we think as active attackers, they've done their planning. They've come out, they've done their surveillance. They may have come out and tested security, done some things for a dry run. This whole thing is working up to the capstone of their project, which is coming in and killing as many people as they can. So what we look at here is that as they're coming in and they're shooting people, are they really stressed out? No, not at all. They're coming in and they're fulfilling their fantasy, their plan. And again, we could talk about motivations for hours and hours and years. But this is the capstone of what they have wanted to do. They're pretty relaxed, pretty calm overall. Now, I want us to think about the law enforcement officers that are arriving there. Most officers are not going to get up in the morning, go to work, and say, man, I really hope today I get involved in an active shooter situation. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to go and courageously face that active shooter. I don't want you to think that at all. But their goal when they go to work most days is not to get in a shooting. So when they arrive, even with all of their training, they're going to have some sympathetic nervous system response. And what our sympathetic nervous system does is it changes our body. We're going to have a higher pulse rate. We're going to have higher blood pressure. At 115 beats per minute, we're going to lose fine motor skill. At 145 beats per minute, we're going to lose complex motor skill. When we get above 145 beats per minute, that means all we have left is complex motor skill. Now, through training and stress inoculation, officers are going to become more proficient, but they're still going to have a sympathetic nervous system response. Do you think it's as easy to aim and shoot a handgun with a pulse that's normal, or when all you have left is gross motor function? Of course, when you have your fine motor skills, you're going to shoot more accurately. Again, it's not a matter of them not wanting to be there, not doing it. That's the type of person they are. They have signed up for this work, but they're still having to fight their bodies a little bit. And so we know that they have incredibly high accuracy ratings when we're looking at our active shooters of somewhere in that 50 to 70%. We're then going to look at the injured to killed ratio. And again, this is an average, but the ratio that Ron Borsch came up with is a 1-to-1 ratio. For every one who is deceased, there is one that is wounded. But wait a minute, when we see it on the news, there'll be 5 killed, 15 wounded. Absolutely, this doesn't mean it's 1-to-1 in every incident. This was when he took the entire data set and did the analysis on it statistically. He comes up with a 1-to-1. But that's important for us to understand as we get into this next segment, which is going to be about response times. So what is the first thing that happens when we need help? What do we have to do very first? From the sign of danger, what do we need to make sure to do?
911.
Call 911. Absolutely. We're going to call 911. How long do you think it takes before somebody calls 911 on average? It could take a minute or 2 minutes. We have an opportunity to go around, and we teach this class all over. And we were once up in a northern Arizona city, and we had a law enforcement officer in the audience taking part in our class that day. And we ask that officer, as we often do, we'll call the local dispatch and make sure they know we're there. We're going to be firing blanks. We're going to be running around with guns. Please know we're here, and if you get calls that it may be us. So at this particular school we were at, you had one row of parking, a driveway, and then a row of parking in all of these residential houses. This was a Saturday morning. Lots of people are home. So we're thinking 911 is going to get a lot of calls. So we take a 9mm blank firing gun out in the parking lot, and for that particular scenario, we fired multiple 9mm blanks. And they're not theatrical blanks. They're full powder, full charge blanks. So it is the sound of a 9mm handgun. The reporter, the sound is loud. So how long do you think it would be before somebody from those houses would call 911 to report gunshots? A lot of times we think almost immediate or 1 to 2 minutes. It wasn't in this case. It wasn't 5 minutes, and it wasn't 10 minutes, and it wasn't 15 minutes. 20 minutes after the gunshots were fired, one of the residences called and said they think there might have been gunshots about 20 minutes ago, but they're not 100% sure. So what we have to remember is we have to call 911, and we need to call 911 no matter what, because even if we're not sure of what that event is, we need to always default to, if we think it might be gunshots, calling, because our brains have what's called a normalcy bias. And when we look at normalcy bias, our brain likes us to be in homeostasis, which means it likes our pulse to be normal, our blood pressure to be normal. It wants us to be happy. We're going to have a good day. So when we hear things like potential gunfire or a potential explosion, our brain will work against us. It will try to calm us and trick us by saying, no, that wasn't gunfire. That was just a car backfiring 7 times rhythmically. And then as our brain tells us, we're like, oh, that's okay, it's just car backfiring. Don't need to worry. Or that wasn't an explosion. That was just the garbage truck at the school dropping a dumpster a little bit too hard. So we have to learn to fight that normalcy bias and make sure to call 911. But we are going to say, for the best case scenario, it'll be 2 minutes before somebody would call 911, 1 to 2 minutes. Then, when we call 911, the dispatcher has to gather information. So, the dispatcher is going to get the very basic information, and they're going to start having officers respond. If they keep you on the phone 5 minutes, it doesn't mean they're not sending officers for 5 minutes. They're going to send officers as soon as they have the crucial information, and then we'll keep gathering more information from you potentially. But it's still going to take them a minute in order to get that crucial information on average. Now, what about police response time? What could police response time look like? When we look at the national average, it's 5 minutes. It could be 2 minutes. It could be 1 minute, it could be 10 minutes, but the national average is 5 minutes. And so that's what we're going to use for our class today. When the officer gets to your place of business, your church, your school, they have to park their car, they have to get out of the car, they have to figure out what door to go to. If you're in a business park, they have to figure out which building to go to. That takes time. That's going to take another minute. And then once the officers get into the building, they still have to find that person in order to get contact with them. They have to find that shooter. And so we're going to again say best case scenario, that takes a minute. So when we add these up, if we look best case for us, we're looking at from the start of the incident to somebody calling 911, 1 minute. Dispatch gathering information, another minute. That's 2 minutes. Police response time, average of 5 minutes. That gives us a total of 7 minutes. Officer in the door, 1 minute. That gives us 8 minutes. Officer's contact with the threat, we're going to say 2 minutes. When we add all of that up, we get 10 minutes. Now, it could certainly be less, but that's what we're looking at with averages. So I want us to stop and think for a minute. When we look here, if this is 10 minutes, we know a bad guy is going to fire a shot from the Ron Bosch study every 4 to 15 seconds. So when we look there, if we go best case for us every 15 seconds, how many rounds are fired in 10 minutes? 40. And that's best case for us. That's not a lot of rounds. But that's 40 rounds in 10 minutes. We're going to go best case for us, 50 to 70% strike someone. Best case for us is 50%. How many of those 40 strike someone? 20. And then if we look at our injured to killed ratio, we're looking at 1 to 1. That means we had 10 killed and 10 wounded. Now, what we have to remember is these are statistics and this is an analysis. That doesn't mean for sure 10 people were killed and 10 were wounded. It could be 2 killed and 5 wounded. Again, we have to recognize the real world. We also have to look at this through another lens, and that is, are most people only shot one time in an active shooter event? And the answer is no. A lot of times people are struck with multiple rounds. And so those are some considerations as you look at this data. But our point in sharing this stopwatch of death and these response times with you is to show how crucial you are. Because the first 10 minutes of that incident, as immediate responders, you're there. Your action is going to save lives, especially as we look at these active attacker events. It is just so crucial for you to be in that immediate responder role. So we're now going to go on to our last account that we're going to share this morning, and that is the Virginia Tech shooting. And the Virginia Tech shooting took place April 16th, 2007. And what I want you to listen for here is just like we talked about at the beginning today when we were looking at Sandy Hook. I want you to listen for active versus passive responses. Again, we're not blaming those that respond passively, but at the same time, we know active responses are going to mitigate loss of life. So let's take a look at Virginia Tech and what that difference may be. Now, there are a couple of things you need to know before we get into the actual Virginia Tech incident. The first thing you need to know is that the classrooms in the building where this attack took place did not have locks on any of the doors. The doors had knobs like you would have on your closet. So there was no way for students or faculty to lock the doors going into the classrooms. Another thing that you need to know, and we'll continue to be talking about this, and you may recall from our See Something, Say Something video, it's so crucial for us to share what we're seeing, because a lot of times these folks are going to test security. And that's exactly what we saw here. 2 days prior to this horrific attack on April 14th, there was a student that went to school very late. When she goes up to the second story where the classrooms are, where the attack is going to take place, she gets to the double doors at the end of the building. The double doors are chained shut and padlocked, so she can't get into the building. It's like that at both ends of the hallway. So she's not able to get in. So she goes downstairs, goes to class through the window of a second-story classroom. She gets into class. Professor doesn't say anything. The students don't say anything, and she doesn't say anything. Now, the attacker was able to see that he could get those doors shut and locked. He, of course, removed the chains and padlocks before class got out so that people would be able to leave, but he was able to rehearse that part of his attack, that part of his plan. Something else you need to know is that, as often is the case, the media went out to the gun ranges around where Virginia Tech is located. And they were asking if this gunman ever went there to practice. Now, something to know is that a lot of our active shooters are not people that spend a lot of time with firearms or firearms training. But this attacker was the exception to the rule. He did actually go out to the range. And you'll see them as they go to an employee at one of the ranges. And you can still find these clips on YouTube. And the media goes up and says, did this person ever come shoot here? And the employee says, yes, they did. And they said, is there anything out of the ordinary this person did? And the employee looks at him and he says, now that you say it, there was. He always laid his targets on the ground. Now that's highly, highly unusual. I've been a part of firearms training for decades now, and I don't know of a gun range anywhere in the country that would let me consistently only lay targets on the ground. That's not a normal way to practice. But as we go through this Virginia Tech situation, you're going to hear just that, why he decided that it was important to practice shooting at the floor. So again, that's another piece of information that if that range safety officer or that range employee had thought about how unusual this was, they could have reported that to the authorities. Now, we need to understand we can't blame people for this event. Well, if that student who climbed in the window had reported it, and if that gun range employee had reported it, could that have made a difference? Absolutely. But we can't say it always will. When we look at the incident in Parkland, Florida, the local sheriff's department knew that this shooter was a potential threat. And information had even been passed on to the FBI about that potential shooter prior to the incident. So we don't want to look at any of these individuals and say, well, they could have prevented it. Yes, it's important to see something, say something, but we can't always guarantee that that is going to solve the problem or prevent that incident.
So let's take a moment too and just pay attention as you go through this. Think about what these students were thinking about, what the teachers were thinking about, but also pay attention to maybe what the perpetrator, what their mindset would have been, because this is where you can change the game. See, this perpetrator, as you've already maybe pieced together, had a plan. They had a version of reality, how they thought it was going to play out. They'd rehearsed this in their head. One of the things that we can track about active killers is they tend to prepare over a long period of time, sometimes years, but certainly many months, which is what this individual did. He had rehearsed how this thing was going to go down. He knew his role to play in this act, and he also knew your role. He knew those students' role. He knew how they were going to react or how he thought they were going to react. And this is where you can change the game. If you choose to have an active response, they're not preparing for that. You can change the game on them, and now they begin to react to what you are doing. And you're going to see, as you go through this shooting, the Virginia Tech shooting, you're going to see both of those played out, and you'll see the results of either one. And again, this isn't to pick on anybody. Everybody did what they were trained to do or where their mindset was. However, we can learn from their choices, particularly the active response choices that they made. So I'll just kind of start, and then I'll hand it off to Chris here. I'm going to tell you the rooms that the shooter went to, because the order is kind of interesting. And he went to most of the rooms, and then he went back to some of them. Some were locked, some became locked after he'd visited them once. You'll see the details as they go down, but let me just kind of give you the chronological order here. He went from room 206 to 207, then over to 205, and then to 211. And then he went back to 207, back to 211, went to 204, back to 206 again, and then for a third time back to 211. And those are the room before he finally ended his own life. Chris, do you want to share the details?
Absolutely. We're going to go through how investigators believe this situation unfolded. We're going to look at each classroom and what transpired in those classrooms. So investigators believe this attack started in room 206. The gunman walks into the room, kills the instructor, and began to shoot the students who hid under desks or went to the back corner of the room. Why would they hide under desks? There's not a lot of other places to hide in a classroom. And if you think about it, a few decades ago, we were teaching people to get under their desk, and getting under their desk would save them from a nuclear bomb blast. And that's what we had taught. So people getting underneath their desks, they're trying to get some protection. People gathering in the corner of the room. When we talked about Sandy Hook earlier today, we saw them going to the corner of the room. Here, it's the same thing. For a long time, that's what crime prevention specialists like myself taught. We said, go to the corner of the room, and it worked great if it was an exterior threat, but it doesn't work for an interior threat. The gunman exited 206 and went to 207. The gunman enters this room, and he kills the instructor, and then begins to shoot students who are initially seated in their desks. The students then try to hide while he shoots them on the floor. Why would they stay seated at their desks initially? They were frozen. Absolutely, they were frozen. The gunman leaves that room and he goes to 205 next. The students in 205, because they've heard the gunfire coming from those other rooms, they've had a chance to process what's going on. And they agree that it sounds like gunfire. So they barricade the door with a table and chairs. And these doors to the classrooms swung into the classroom. So as they put the table and chairs there, they realized there wasn't enough weight to hold them in place as a barricade. So they sat down against the table and chairs to use their body weight to keep that door shut. Remember, there were no door locks. They couldn't lock the door. The gunman comes to that room. He cannot enter the room because of their barricade. He gets frustrated. He shoots through the doorknob 3 times. He tries to push his way into the room and he still can't enter. He leaves room 205 and he never returns to room 205. And that's important for us to understand. They were able to successfully barricade and keep that gunman out. So everybody in room 205 survived. And there was nobody struck by the 3 rounds that he fired through the doorknob. He left 205 and he goes to room 211. And in room 211, as he enters, there's a table that was in front of the door. But in this room, there was nobody holding the table. So as he pushes in on the door and enters the room, the table slides out of the way. The students are in that classroom, nobody holding the table, but all of a sudden we see one of our heroes from Virginia Tech come into action. And so we see Matthew Laporte, who stands and charges at the gunman. Matthew Laporte is shot 6 times before he falls to the ground. 6 times. Again, survival mindset. He didn't, I'm dead, I got shot once. It took 6 shots before he fell to the ground. He was the only one in that classroom that tried to charge, tried to swarm. Do you think it could have been more successful if there were others that helped him? Absolutely. But we've also seen in the real world people that as one individual has successfully swarmed. And so we don't want you to think that a one-person swarm never works. So the gunman walks around 211 after shooting Matthew Laporte and shoots other students. Room 207. Students, remember, he's already been in 207. Some of them are wounded. They get up and they barricade the door using their hands and their feet. And the gunman comes back to the room and he pushes on the door, but he can't get in. Now, our first choice for barricades is not going to be your hands and your feet. But if that's all you have, can hands and feet work? And we know the answer to that is yes, because we know as a result of them holding that door shut that that gunman could not enter. He does shoot the doorknob, does not strike anyone, and continues to push, cannot get in. He leaves, he never goes back to 207. He now goes back to 211. And as he enters 211, most of the people are lying around on the floor. Remember, he's already been in this room. He enters and he shoots people as they're laying on the floor. The gunman leaves 211 and he goes to room 204 next. And room 204 is a special room. Room 204 is Professor Labrescu's classroom. And Professor Labrescu had been face to face with evil before. Professor Labrescu was an Auschwitz concentration camp survivor. So I want us to think a minute. This is taking place in 2007. So was Professor Labrescu a young man in 2007? No, not at all. But Professor Labrescu heard the gunshots. Remember, he knew what gunshots sounded like. He barricades the door with his body and he yells at his students to jump out the window. Now, on the first floor, jumping out the window, yeah, no problem. Remember, they're on the second floor. So when they go out the window, they have a little bit of a drop. Well, 12 of his 16 students jump out the window. All 12 of them survive. Yes, they had some injuries from jumping out the window, but they were injuries that healed. There were no fatalities from those 12. So, again, we look at that action. The gunman came, he looked at the door, and he fired through the door, striking Professor Labrescu. After being hit, Professor Labrescu was not able to continue to keep that door shut, so the gunman was able to force his way in, and the gunman then shot and killed Professor Labrescu. There were still 4 students in that classroom. The gunman fired at those 4 students. One of those students was shot and killed, but the other 3 survived. So when we look here at room 204, we had 1 student and Professor Labrescu that were deceased. So we had 2 fatalities. We had 15 people that survived that day from that classroom because of the actions that they took. And again, we can see Professor Labrescu's survival mindset here. Get out the window, jump out the window. We need to take action. The gunman then leaves 204 and he goes back to 206. He re-enters the room a second time and he continues shooting people who are mostly on the floor. He then goes back to 211 for a third time. He's shooting people on the floor. Investigators believe the last person he shoots is Matthew Laporte. Remember, Matthew Laporte had stood up to him and he had shot Matthew Laporte previously 6 times. Matthew Laporte was found with an execution-style wound. We know the gunman then turned the firearm on himself and committed suicide. And that was the conclusion of this horrific incident. The reason we share this Virginia Tech incident with you is because, again, we can clearly see action versus passive responses. And again, not blaming those that responded passively, but knowing that action is going to make a difference. So we're going to start to teach you after our break all about the I Lived program, which is focused on options that you can use to have an active response. But your big takeaway from this morning should be that you need to have a survival mindset and that action will always beat a passive response. If you don't remember what action to take, what we want you to do is take some action. Thank you all.
Well, my name's Sam Brady. I've been working with Chris and Bruce with Arizona Church Security Network and IC Save for several years now. My story's had a lot of different little events that have popped up. Some of them tense, some of them scary, some of them less so and more profound. What's been unique about it is that I've seen who's helped me. In particular, my wife and my father-in-law have helped me kind of discover this passion that I have for helping people learn life-saving information, from stop the bleed to active killer survival. How do we deal with life's scariest moments when we don't even want to think about them? From their coaching and their love and care and concern for me to help me figure those things out about me, these hidden passions that I didn't understand myself sometimes, they saw in me someone who cares about people, and I do. I couldn't have articulated that on my own. I needed them to help me see it. I care about people on a deep level, but I care about people particularly when they're going through life's hardest things. It's what's got me into the military. It's what's got me into law enforcement. It's what, through these different paths, have brought me here to Arizona Church Security Network and IC Save. I remember 9/11 happened, and I was younger, and a lot of individuals around me wanted to go fight because they just wanted to do something. But before we even got to that moment, the day 9/11 happened, everybody just no longer was separated by their the political affiliation they had, no church that they belonged to, no certainly the color of their skin wasn't. There was nothing that divided us. There was one thing that united us, and that we were Americans, and that this thing was evil and unjust, and it was wrong. And while we may get ready to go stop the bad guys and take the fight to them, before we did that, we banded together as brothers and sisters, as Americans. This training helps as an opportunity for us to do that in a new way, and there's a spark that gets lit in me every time I get to be a part of it. So, long roundabout story. I got into this through the help of some really fantastic human beings. I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for my wife, Nisa, and my father-in-law, Mike. I needed them to help me see this path as clearly as I do now.
This morning at First Baptist Church of Angel Grove, an active shooter entered the building during worship services. The shooter opened fire, killing 9 congregants and wounding 23. Stay tuned for information on this late-breaking story.